Okay, a very big welcome to everybody here tonight, live both on Zoom and on YouTube, and a very big hello to all those that catch up with this video later this week or perhaps some other time in the future, who've come back for part two of Bob and his one-man DXpedition to the South Pacific. Bob, GM4DLG, came to the club a couple of weeks ago to talk about his amazing DXpedition down there in the South Pacific, across some of the islands and onto the mainlands of the two big countries down there, ZL and VK. And he got about halfway through the talk when we broke off last time and agreed to get him back as soon as we could. So very, very big welcome to Bob. Bob, I'm going to hand the microphone over to you and let you take it away.
Thank you very much indeed, Nick. And apropos your previous comments, in an hour's time, you probably will have wished that I had hit the mute button. We'll see. Anyway, before I actually start the slide presentation, there's one little story I forgot to tell you, I realise now, on the last talk. And that was a little bit about one of the common things you do on DXpeditions. You think you've got everything planned. You think you've remembered every item that you need. But as soon as I got to the Chatham Islands, when I was getting ready to put the antenna up out there for the first time, I had a slight problem, and I was going to mention it then and I completely forgot. So I may as well mention it now. You'll remember, I think I'm correct in saying that I showed you some brief pictures of one or two things in the Chatham Islands, and one of them was the only store on the island, the only shop. And in fact, I had occasion to go in there in a panic on my first day on the Chatham Islands, because I was getting ready to erect the antenna. And of course, because a lot of this work was grey line stuff, it meant I was either putting the antenna up in the twilight or just before dawn when it was a bit dark. And I thought I'd put my head torch in the suitcase. When I got to undo the suitcase in the Chathams, I realized it wasn't there. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, you know, there's only one store on the island. What are the chances they've got a head torch? So I rushed up there and said, do you have a head torch? And they said, I'm sorry, we don't. But they obviously were thinking fast, because they said, we've got one of these. And what they gave me was one of these tiny little LED push button torches, you see. And they said, that's the best we can do. Will that do? I said, well, I suppose it's better than a kick in the teeth. More about the teeth in a minute. So I took it back and thought, how am I going to manage this? Because when I'm taking the antennas down to the beach, they're already extended. Because I learned the hard way, if you take the antennas down to the beach when they're still retracted, and then you start pulling the telescopic whips out, you get sand in the sections, and then it's a real problem when you want to put the thing back in the suitcase. So on all occasions, I'd lay my antennas out before I got on the sand, the full 30 feet for each one, and then carry them with all the wire on over my head horizontally like that. That's fine in the daylight, but when it's dusk and you've got an antenna whipping around in front of you that you don't want to catch on anything in case it breaks, you need something like a torch. So I thought, well, I've got a torch now, it's this thing, but all my hands are already occupied. Where can I put the torch? And I thought there's only one place, hence the kick in the teeth comment, and that's there. All right. Now, if you do that with a metal torch, after a while, it starts, you know, metal on teeth isn't very good. So every hand must always remember to take self-amalgamating tape with them. So I wrap the self-amalgamating tape around the end of the torch. And if you'd have seen me taking the antennas out or down in the dusk or the dawn, and you saw some idiot doing this, what would you think? So that's one of the downsides of this hobby, and why some of us might have a, you know, ham radio enthusiasts have a strange reputation with some members of the public. I did think at one point of thinking, well, how about duct taping it to my head? And then I thought, right, yeah, I can just imagine trying to take duct tape off my head when it comes to, you know, wanting to go for breakfast or dinner or whatever. People will look at me even more strangely. Anyway, enough of that. Thank you for coming back to this talk. I hope it's going to be entertaining. I suppose I would say I hope that you're not gluttons for punishment, but you must think I must have said something right last time, or you wouldn't all be here. So I really appreciate you you all coming back. So I suppose you ought to get on and do this. And pardon me if I get this wrong again, Nick, because I'm still a bit of a virgin when it comes to doing this sort of thing. Let me just get my machine up and powered and ready, and then I'll share it. Just let me. This is the part 2 of the AAA talk. I'll let you be the deciding factor as whether this is a AAA talk or not at the end of this particular chat. And if you'll remember, we stopped just at the point where I'd come back from Norfolk Island, and I'd just arrived back on the North Island. And the slide I showed you on the North Island, which you've seen before, so you've already got a taste of what might be coming, was this one. And this showed what I was planning to do on the North Island. And you can see from this key, the color coding there, and the 4 dots there, that of the 4 sites I'd planned to visit and operate from, I only did it from 2 of them. And so the first part of this talk is about what happened here. Now, I should say at the outset, when I was preparing the expedition, I thought there's only one of me. I'm going away for a long time. The only sensible thing to do is plan it with military precision. And I had to do that, being an ex-RAF man, of course. And the other reason for planning it with military precision was when it came to hire the camper van, my plan was to hire it in Auckland and then drive it down North Island, across to South Island, do South Island, and then leave it in Christchurch to fly then back to Sydney and then on to Lord Howe Island. And I thought, I better just ring these guys up and just find out about the electric systems on the van. I knew that there were 2 batteries, obviously one for the engine and what the van hirers call the house battery. So I rang them up and said, look, I need to be honest with you. I'm a radio ham. I might be using the house battery quite a lot. Can you tell me whether the van has a split charge relay system? The problem is I have an electrical engineering background, and I'd made the assumption that all the customer service people in these self-hire van places knew what I meant by a split charge relay, but of course they didn't. And all I would get back was the sort of oft-repeated mantra, well, the house battery does get trickle charged by the engine, but not sufficient to keep it fully charged. So we do recommend that every alternate night you stay in a holiday park where there are facilities for you to recharge from the mains. So I took that at face value. I'd got no choice. So I booked up all the place I was going to stay on New Zealand ahead of time. And so my schedule was one night in a holiday park, the next night freedom camping, then a night in a holiday park, and so on. And in retrospect, I didn't need to do that, but I only found that out when I was on Tasmania, when I hired the same sort of van and managed to last all the time on Tasmania without going near a holiday park. But anyway, never mind. So that was the rather rigid schedule I'd got. And so the 2 purple dots you can see there were actually holiday parks. And you can see that my schedule, what I intended to do, having gone to that first purple dot, not far away from the town of Tauranga there on the Bay of Plenty on the north side of the island. My next stop was going to be freedom camping in Gisborne and then down to Napier and then on a bit further south. And that all got shot to ribbons because I picked the van up in Auckland and set out for that first purple dot, a place called Ohope. And I was halfway between Auckland and Tauranga. And I'd planned this, by the way, to arrive there in sort of mid-afternoon so that I could get the antennas erected. So I was about halfway between Auckland and Tauranga when all of a sudden I ran into, basically it was a traffic jam. The traffic was stationary, and of course it was just a 2-lane highway, nothing special. And I thought, well, this can't last for very long. It actually lasted all the way into Tauranga. I've never been in a traffic jam as long as that for a long, long time. It was over 50 miles long, and it was nose to tail the whole way. And I was really surprised because everyone had said, oh, there's only 4 million people in New Zealand, the roads will be empty. They'd not reckoned with what happens when you do a rather major roadworks, which is what they were doing in Tauranga itself. So the upshot of that was I arrived at my first destination when it was dark almost, absolutely knackered. And I thought, there is no way I can then just rush on and do my first freedom camping. I want to try operating from this first place. So straight away, my schedule was shot. In the end, I didn't get to visit Gisborne, where the red dot is. And then there were other problems, as you can see from what this key says with regard to antennas when I got to the yellow dot there. So only 2 of the activations were possible on North Island. So let's just talk about the first one. So the first one then is that first purple dot, a place called Hopi. And on the left-hand picture, you can see that it was a holiday park. And the image at the top right is an expanded view of that. Ohope is actually on a sort of long spit of land, and the red circle shows the holiday park. And then the final image on the right-hand side is the a blow-up of that image again, and the red ellipse there shows where I parked my van in the holiday park. I'd specifically asked for a site next to the beach, and so that's where I operated from. The problems with this, though, soon became apparent when I erected my antenna. The distance there doesn't look very far, but it is because the tidal range here is quite large. So I had to go quite a way out onto the beach, which, as you can see from the colour, isn't actually sand as we would know it, so to speak. It's very, very fine volcanic sand, almost the same as ours, but not quite. But perfectly okay for my screw jacks, which I spoke about for the antennas, that I screw into the sand. So the other problems that I had was when I looked out to sea, and it became a problem. More about that in a minute. The antenna of choice, because of when I looked out to sea, I thought, I'm not sure I want to put an antenna out there, one part of which will end up with its feet in the water. I think I need to use an antenna where both of them the bottom of them don't get wet. And the only antenna that did that was my 20-meter broadside array, the one I used in my last operation on Norfolk Island, Ball Bay, if you remember. So that's the 20-meter broadside array, and that's what I used. And just to remind you, this is the EasyNet chart I showed you in the last talk of that antenna, and there are all the salient features, and the most important ones are the elevation angle, the gain of 10 dBi in the front to back. So that's what I used. However, in this particular case, it had to be quite a long way from where the rig was, and in fact, you can see there the model I was using on Ohope was that antenna, but with 57 meters of coax between the antenna and the rig. Now, what I did here was put that into the model, that line with a little T on it, and I also put in the loss characteristics of RG58 coax, which are at 14.2 megahertz, round about 4.5 dBs per meter. That's the attenuation loss. So when you factor that into the model, you see the gain has dropped. In fact, the gain now has dropped by just under or just over 2 dBis, which if you do the calculations, you'll find that's right. So we've lost some gain. And just to show you that, let me just toggle backwards and forwards, and you can see that gain number changing as I do that. So we're not getting as much gain, but it was still quite respectable, and it didn't make any difference to the elevation angle or the beam width. So that was kind of good. So that's what I used, and the antenna is the picture of it. That's basically the same thing you saw in Ball Bay, but this time the antenna aren't strapped to a fence post. They're using the screw jacks. And you'll notice it's some way back from the sea. And you'll think, that doesn't look too bad. But if you look on the left-hand side, these 2 little dots are actually people just to the left of the left-hand antenna there. They're people going out to surf. Those breakers are bigger than you think. And then I realized one of the things I was going to have to put up with on all of the shores of New Zealand was the fact that the sea had come blasting across the South Pacific, and there was nothing to stop big breakers. And it wasn't like Norfolk Island where there was a nice protective reef. Not reef, what am I talking about? Reef. So I was a bit nervous about putting the antenna right next to the sea. And this was a common characteristic for all of my time on New Zealand, I'm afraid to say. But you can see I managed to work 30 QSOs, and of those, 4 were G stations. And that was in an evening session, which kind of was a bit strange because I was pointing north, and I didn't expect when I was pointing north to be working on an evening session into G-land, because evening there is the morning in the UK. That's more like long path territory, which is not pointing north. I'm sure, though, that all of those stations I worked, including the Gs, were over the North Pole. It was the only direction that it could possibly be. So that was counterintuitive, at least to me. But then I don't operate 20 from home really now at all. So maybe I've just forgotten what I once knew about 20 meters. I don't know. Anyway, so the next place I went was another holiday park. You remember I missed out the freedom camping bit. And here's the expanded version of that. That's where the van was parked. This time it was darker sand. In fact, it wasn't sand really. It was small volcanic pebbles is the best way of describing it. The water retention of this beach was nothing like as good as the previous one. And the screw jacks weren't quite as holding up the antenna quite as well. And it was actually, when I came to operate on Napier, even further. I had to have a longer coax run again. This time I did 20 QSOs, but again, I got a fair number of Gs. Again, it was an evening session, but this time I was pointing west. So I was completely flummoxed now as to what was happening in terms of propagation. So later on, I'll try and explain a little bit more about what I thought and perhaps, was or wasn't happening. But that was not too bad. So those two operations were okay. I was starting to think I'd not really addressed the big elephant in the room yet, and that was my failure on Norfolk Island to work on 80 meters. So the next place I was going, oh, by the way, I should just say before I do that, there's the antenna on Napier, and as you can see, I've got 75 meters of coax now. So the gain has dropped a little bit more. It's now just a tad less than 7 dBi, but still pretty well effective. Okay, the next place was Purareri Beach. I hope I pronounced that correctly. This was a true freedom camping site. The sand here was much more like sand, which was good news. That's where I camped, where the red ellipse is. And freedom camping is, as you probably know, it's there are campsites that have minimal facilities, and they only normally have a toilet block, and just above that red ellipse and to the left is the toilet block. And that strip of land where I parked, you just turn up and park your van there. There's an honesty box that you put your money in. And I was very impressed because the honesty box, it had a particular, the price was there. And I can't remember what the price was, but I know I'd not got the right note. So I put in, I don't know, a $20 note, and that was probably about $5 more than it should have been. I didn't think anything more about it. But the next morning when I woke up, I found a $5 note change underneath my windscreen wiper. So great system they have there. Now, the plan here was to meet one of the ZLs I've spoken to in over the years, many years, I speak on 80 meters, and that's Dave, ZL20K, who lives not too far away from here in a town inland from the beach, but he has a facility here down near the beach. And every time we work Dave from 80 from this part of the world, he always used to sign himself ZL2OK on the beach. So I was looking forward to meeting Dave, and we'd arranged that he would meet me as I arrived, or just after I'd arrived, and we would then spend the evening in my van trying to use my antenna on 80. I was looking forward to that. But he was going to be arriving a bit later because he was working during the day. So he said, I'll turn up, probably just as it's getting dark. So my plan was to erect the two element 80 meter antenna, and then everything will be hunky-dory. So here I am. Here's the antenna, the two element 80 meter antenna. The waves are still troubling me a bit, but they don't seem quite as big as they were in Napier and Ohope. So I've got a sort of a grin on my face. However, at this point, things started to go pear-shaped. And I'm conscious that, I talk an awful lot. I think my voice is getting a little bit hoarse. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just let you read what I was thinking a few minutes after this picture was taken. Tell me when you're ready for me to carry on.
That's good, Bob.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I really couldn't believe it. my worst fears had come home to roost. I think I said in my last talk, the problem with using a series section transformer is that if the antenna's resonance when you set it up is not what it was when you built the series section transformer, then you've got a real problem because it takes time to build a new one. And if you remember, I described what a series section transformer was in the last talk. So I think most of you are familiar with that. So here I was in a difficult position. It was getting dark, and I'm thinking this antenna is not going to work because, you know, my serial section transformer is built for an antenna that's showing 18 ohms. And you can see from that it was nothing like. So I'm thinking, oh my goodness, Dave's going to turn up soon. What am I going to do? And then Dave turned up. And my brain then, the different hemispheres of my brain, we're in a slight disagreement. That hemisphere of my brain, which is the, how can I put it, borderline Asperger's, anorak train spotter mode, was screaming at me, ignore Dave, you know, it's the reason you've come here is to do 80 meters. You've got to carry on getting this work. You know, just tell him politely that, you know, you won't be able to, you know, use the radio, and nice to see him and all the rest of it. Luckily, the sensible, emotional, much more relaxed side of my brain said, look, Bauer, don't be a prat. You've been talking to this guy for many years. You know, he's turned up to meet you like he agreed. Playing around with antennas is of no importance whatsoever than to doing the human animal thing and meeting someone and finding out what they're really like, you know, like us humans do when we're face to face and all the other means of communicating kick in, all the non-verbal things. So I said, look, we've got this huge problem. We can't use this, Dave. Can you help me take this down? How about we go back to your place near the beach and operate your stuff? And he said, well, actually, I'm really pleased about that. You've noticed I've not switched my 4x4 engine off. It was still sitting up by my van with the engine running. I said, yeah, I did notice that. He said, the problem is it's very old. I've got a problem with the alternator. If I switch it off, I'm not sure it will start again. So he said it's very good that we can just nip up back to my place. So that is what we did. And I think you've probably seen this picture before. I think I showed you that when I was talking about Norfolk Island. I'm looking a bit stressed and tired for obvious reasons. Dave is much more relaxed, and he was a really nice guy, ever such a nice chap to talk to, exactly as I expected he would be. And this was after it got dark. We were just about to jump in his 4x4, the engine of which was still ticking over, and he was going to disappear. We're going to disappear and have a look at his stuff there. So here is his place, but it's not actually on the beach. It's about half a mile back from the beach. It's this old caravan, and it's a bit of an old thing, but he uses that just to operate Greyline DX. You know, when he's down there in the evening or the morning, and then if it's in the evening, he just kips out in that and then goes off from there early next morning. You can see the antennas there. He freely admitted that those big HF antennas, he did say one was a TH6DXX. I think, I'm not familiar with Yagis and all the rest of it, but that was obviously one of those two big ones. But he did admit that the rotator was completely frozen up with rust, and he hadn't used it for years. And on 80 meters, he uses high dipoles, which are strung between the high trees. So we went on his rig and we had a great time talking. It's a strange experience. First time for me talking back to the UK from the place that I'd spoken to, you know, many times. So I had a really great time with Dave. I really enjoyed that. But unfortunately, the schedule required me to disappear on the next morning. So the next morning, straight to Wellington, from Wellington, night in Wellington, and then across on the ferry. And you can see here, this is my schedule for South Island. And straight away, you can see that a similar problem happened on South Island as well. There are more black dots than anything else. So if you count up the blue dots here, you'll see that on the whole of New Zealand, I only operated on 4 sites out of a lot more than that. And it's a very sad story as to why. So let's go through that quickly. The first black dot on the upper right there was about a mile and a half off the ferry. I arrived there in the early afternoon, and I thought this is going to be great. Now, I did a lot of research before I went out on this trip, and the amount of time I spent here on Google Maps, and this is a close-up of the highway. I went all the way down Highway 1 from the ferry all the way down as far as Christchurch, looking for suitable sites to Freedom Camp, and I found this one, an hour and a half from the ferry, and I thought, wonderful, great, right by the coast. The sand doesn't look really much like sand. It's probably volcanic, but what the hell? That's the best we can do. I'm going to aim to Freedom Camp here. Big mistake, because the one thing that these images don't give you is the elevation characteristic of the ground you're looking at. Because when I got there, this is what I saw, and I thought this is going to be great until I got out the van and walked to the edge of the grey area across there and found that just beyond there, the whole periphery of that grey area, it was almost sheer. It was like a sheer cliff face. There was no vegetation growing it. The vegetation you can see beyond that is down at beach level. And there was no way I could get down to the beach. And so I learnt that, you've got to perhaps research that. I could camp there, but I couldn't operate radio from there, which is a bit of a shame. By the way, State Highway 1 is the New Zealand equivalent of the M1 or the M6. It's the roads are not quite what they are here. So we didn't go there, but we did then go straight on to Christchurch, just tiny bit of sightseeing, not much. Of course, the main event in Christchurch was in 2011, the earthquake. On the left there is the cathedral before the earthquake. On the top is the cathedral. It was straight after the earthquake. And then the bottom is the picture I took when I was there in February. As you can see, 30 years after the earthquake, they've still got a long way to go in rebuilding the cathedral. They haven't even started on rebuilding the tower. They demolished the tower and started from scratch. Here's another picture. And as you can see, they've got hardly anywhere on rebuilding the tower. The other interesting thing about this trip, I went into the Earthquake Museum. A very good place if you're interested in the history of the earthquake. And in the foyer is this sort of panorama of pictures taken almost straight after the invention of the camera. At the far right of this panorama is a picture taken in 1844, all the way up to the 2011 picture. And one of them in particular, in the middle, there's a blur there at the bottom. In 1888, an earthquake struck Christchurch and demolished part of the cathedral, just the top part of the spire. But I thought, Christchurch is a great place in terms of the people. They're really nice and laid back. I'm not sure I'd like to live in a city where lightning really does strike twice, I have to say. Anyway, on we go, further down the coast. I then stopped to see Ken, ZL30Z. You may have worked him. He's not an 80-meter DXer. 40 and 20 is his bag. He lives on the outskirts of Timaru. It's been some years since I'd been on the air with him, back when I was doing 20 and 40, before I discovered the magic of 80 meters. And I remember him saying last time I worked him that he would not have real problems with noise level in the urban environment he was in, even though he was on the edge of Timaru, overlooking, trees and grass and what have you. And he was talking then about possibly having to think about remoting some of his setup. And when I visited him, he'd actually done it. He'd bought some land up in the foothills of the Southern Alps, and he'd set up a complete remote antenna farm there, which he controlled from the internet from Timaru. And he'd done all of the design of all the circuitry himself. Absolutely fascinating. I did say he ought to think about publishing it somewhere, but he was, he seemed to be quite sort of, I don't think he'd even thought about it, but a hell of a nice guy. And so was his wife, Shirley. I had a thoroughly wonderful time with them. So on we go again. We're now beyond Timaru, and we're heading for that next black spot just south of the town of Oamaru there on the southeastern coast, should I say. So this is the spot I got to then. This place, there's the van. There's the 80-meter antenna. I had tried to put it up, but the problem here was not only the breakers, but the wind was starting to get up. And these antennas, as I think I said last time, aren't guide. And it was just impossible. I was starting to tear my hair out at this point, because I'm thinking, I wonder whether I'm ever going to manage to get these antennas up and have another go at 80. It just wasn't possible here. And I was sharing my grief with the next guy I stayed with, Ron, ZL4RMF. And Ron said, look, forget all that, Bob. I can tell you're getting stressed about that. Just come and stay with me for the weekend. The bad weather's rolling in. It's getting windy. It's going to get worse. It's going to rain. Come up to my place. And so the next place I went was, before I did that, I should say, before I just went to see Ron, I did stay one night in the holiday park in Dunedin, on the outskirts of Dunedin. I had got plans to operate from here, from the beach there. It was only a few hundred yards from the holiday park. And the same thing happened here. The elevation aspect came to kick me in the teeth, because where all the cars are on the, parked right next to the beach, all the shrubs there, the elevation is such that you can't see the beach from the cars. So there was no way I could stick antennas into a beach I couldn't see, especially with the breakers. So, from that, I decided to go and see Ron. So here we are in Ron's place. You've probably seen this picture before. I think I showed you this last week, or 2 weeks ago rather. And it was the first time I met Ron. It was I was quite surprised to find that he looked a little bit frail. And in conversation, I was even more surprised because he turned out to be 5 years younger than me. I didn't, I thought maybe that he was a bit older than me, actually, looking at him, but he was quite frail and quite thin. But very interesting chap to meet. Heart of gold. He had some very strong views, I have to say, about some things. But he was a very nice chap to talk to, very hospitable, I have to say. He couldn't do enough for me. A great cook, but then he lived by himself. In course of conversation, I found out he'd been a farmer, and he talked about his sisters and his nieces and nephews. He never mentioned anything about wife or anything like that, or children. I come to the conclusion that he was probably a bachelor, probably maybe all life. I don't know. It's not something he actually touched on, but that's the impression I got. And it was obvious to me that ham radio was a major, major part of his life. It was one of his main reasons for getting up every morning. That was quite obvious. And as we all know, those of us who operated on 80 meters DX, Ron was a beacon, not only on 80 meters, but 20 and 40 as well. I'm sure many of you listening will have spoken to him. He seemed to be always there, and he had a wonderful location. Here it is, on top of the hills there. And you can, on the top right of that picture, you can just make out the ocean. And this site's about 10, 15 miles south of Dunedin. And you can see the mast he's got there. And that tall mast supports quite a high 80-meter dipole. He does operate on the other bands as well. And so wonderful site. And we went and used his equipment. He'd spent a lot of money on his equipment. It was all top of the range stuff. I was very impressed. It really was really rather super. But even he, in that location, admitted that he was starting to, his noise levels were starting to rise on receive, and I could tell that was the case. He was getting S3, S4, S5, and S6 at some points when we were operating 80 meters. And once again, I got to talk to a lot of the guys back on the 80-meter DX portion of the band, talking to the band of brothers, who I call them. So it was really great to meet Ron. And it was funny. In course of conversation, he did sort of now and again wheeze a bit. And I said, "Are you okay?" He said, "Well, I've got this really bad chest, and I've got this oxygen bottle, and sometimes I have to take a whiff of that." And I thought, "Oh dear." Didn't think anything more about it. But as I left in the following morning, I thought, it's been really nice, but what are the chances I'll come out here again? Neither of us are spring chickens. I wonder if I'll ever see Ron again. And unfortunately, that certainly is not going to be the case, because as Phil intimated last week, Ron, unfortunately, is no longer with us. It was, about 6 weeks ago, maybe 2 months ago, I got an email from his nephew telling me that Ron had sadly passed away. And so, unfortunately, he is now silent key, which is a terrible shame, because not only for him, obviously, and his family, but for us guys, because now we're sort of, I must say, I haven't been on 80 meters. I haven't been on any band since I got back from this trip. I really must sort that out. But I'm sure Phil can tell us what things are like on 80 meters at the moment without that rock of Ron there to help us along. Anyway, so that was the black dot near Dunedin. By now, I was way behind schedule. I had to bin going to Invercargill there, the red dot, which was going to be freedom camping. So I went across to Queenstown, did the tourist thing, did all the, tourist stuff, and then drove from there, having stayed overnight, to the next black dot on the northern coast of Northern Ireland. And I was going to freedom camp there. And, when I got there, I thought, oh, at least, there's no sort of height problems here. This time it's all right. But unfortunately, in the little area where I was going to camp, there was a notice saying no freedom camping. And I know very well that the New Zealanders are red hot on that sort of thing. So that ruled it out. So I got back on the road, very tired, and a long drive from Queenstown. And by now it was getting perilously close to dark. And I kept driving until I got to that next purple dot, a place called Bruce Bay. And I got to Bruce Bay and I thought, what am I going to do now? It's dark. I haven't got the energy to put up an antenna, a big antenna. And besides which, there are no sand, there's just rocks. What am I going to do? So you remember when I was showing you that picture of the suitcase last week, that I decided to take some reserve items. I've been caught out before on doing DXpeditions, and I decided to take a reserve antenna, which is something I don't normally do. I bought a commercial antenna, an ATAS mobile whip, Yaesu's equivalent to the screwdriver, and this is connected just by coax to the FT857, the main rig I took, and you can command it to tune it from the 857. And as you can see from that and the ruler, this thing's about 1.8 meters long. That's all, and it can take the whip off and it goes in the suitcase. And there also is my reserve rig, the 817 and a small amplifier. So I got this with me, and I thought, aha, I'm going to try putting the ATAS. This will never work. I might get Australia if I'm lucky. So this was that night, just as it's getting dusk. I didn't want to attach the antenna, the coax, the antenna to the chassis. It's a higher machine. I thought better of it. So I thought, I'll just cut a couple of quick 5-meter long quarter-wave vertical radials for 20, and I'll attach them. And then you can see them. You can see that one on the forefront there, and there's one slightly behind. See, so there are 2 radials going out in a V shape from the bottom of the antenna, and I thought, this thing's not going to work. A mobile antenna that long? Well, here are the results. That first evening, I only made 9 QSOs, but 2 of them were G stations, and one of them was Peter, who I trust, as I said before, and he gave me a 5 and 8. Now, this shot all my carefully prepared EasyNet programs and all the antennas I was going to pieces. And the next morning, from the same location, I worked an EA3. He only gave me a 2x1, but the problem I had with both of these is that I was on the north-facing coast of South Island. That was a short path back to the UK. So how come one was evening, one was morning, local time? One of them wouldn't make any sense, would it? So I thought, by the way, before I go on to show you what that I thought in terms of grey line maps, I decided when I got back to actually model this antenna in EasyNet, and this is what I've done. I modeled the loading coil and all the rest of it. I didn't model the van. I'd like to have done that because the van's a large lump of metal, but that's a very intricate process to model motor vehicles in EasyNet. I've done it. I've done it for my tractor, but I didn't have time to do it for the van. But the thing that really knocked me for 6 was look at the polar diagram. Okay, there's some high angle there, but it's got gain. It's got 3 dBi of gain. Okay, it's an elevation angle of 10, and the front to back's over 9 dB. So no wonder it was capable of doing more than I thought. So I was kind of reeling from this. I'm so glad I tried it. And this was that first evening's operation. Of course, that translated that evening into morning here in the UK. And there's all the QSOs I made. And this is a similar presentation to those I showed you last time I gave you the talk. There are 3 grey line plots here showing the time I started, the middle point, which is the main big plot, and then the one on the right, and the same color coding. The blue dots are those contacts I made between 7:30 and 8:15, and the red ones are vice versa. And the purple one was actually Peter, G3IRQ. And the yellow dot and the diagram on the top right shows the way I was firing. And the thing is, I'm sure that the signals must have been going over the pole, because behind me I'd got the Southern Alps, which are 14,000 feet. I don't think for a minute I got anything coming off the back of the antenna. So that was kind of strange because, morning reception in the UK normally means long path. At least it does for 80 meters. Maybe my lack of memory on 20 meters, which is what I was operating, comes to home to roost here, and perhaps you guys will know better than me. Maybe it was because the whole path between me and the UK was in daylight. I don't know, but whatever. And by the way, there's all the guys that I spoke to. You might recognise some of these call signs. The EA5 station is Paul. He's a Glaswegian who has a holiday home down on the coast of Spain. He's got a very nice setup. And you'll also probably know IK4GRO, Lauro. He's on 40 meters a lot. I worked him. So they're the guys I worked. Color-coded to match the dots. There you go. That's my military background coming out again. And this is the next morning's QSO, evening in the UK. And I'm still thinking, which way is it going round? It must be grey line, surely, because, there's darkness between me and the UK at the moment there. So I was just wondering which path. And then I think this made it up for me, because just before I worked that EA3, I heard quite a few G stations a few minutes before, one of them whom was reveling in the fact that he'd now got the legitimate possibility of operating with 1 kilowatt, because of course the power level had increased for full license holders, and he was happily working guys in Europe saying it was with 1 kilowatt, and I don't think he knew that there was a ZL there, desperately hoping he would hear me, but he didn't. But that convinced me that the path had to be over the pole. Whether I'm right or not, I don't know. But to be able to do that path with that antenna is just phenomenal stuff. I really loved it. Okay, so how are we doing? We're going to speed up. I've still got to do Lord Howe. So the next stop was the next blue dot. And after that, I was going to cross the Alps and go back to Christchurch, get on an airplane and fly off to Lord Howe Island. So we better speed up. This was another holiday park, this time right by the sea. The same thing as last time. I used my 2-element 20-meter broadside array. In retrospect, I wish I'd tried my 80-meter antenna. I don't know why I didn't. But again, I got 5Gs. Again, of an evening session, and that must have been over the poles short path as well. So, and that was the antenna. This time I was using 51 meters of coax, so I was back up to about 8 dBi. So, okay, here we go. Get on the airplane. The red flight was Emirates business class. It was the first leg, actually, of my way home. And that was great, of course, nice airplane, lie flat bed, overnight in Sydney. And then the yellow flight was out to Lord Howe Island, and then a week later back. And the airplane I flew that leg on was nothing like an A380. This was the airplane. This is a very small de Havilland-8, one of the very early versions. This aircraft is at least 20 years old, operated by Qantas Link. It can only take, I think, just over 30 passengers. And because of the fact that you're going all the way out to Lord Howe Island over the ocean, and because you've got to have enough fuel to diversions, the baggage on this thing was severely limited. 7 kilograms of hand luggage and 14 kilograms only of whole baggage. And even then, if it was a full passenger load, they reserve the right to not include any of your whole baggage. And you then have to wait at least 1, possibly 2 days to get your stuff. So this gave me a problem. It meant whichever way I tried it, I could not take 2 masts. I had to leave one of my masts behind in the hotel in Sydney, and I just took 1 mast. That was, it was either that or don't go to Lord Howe Island. So we got in this thing, and we got over to Lord Howe. And here's a Google Earth image of Lord Howe from the north. Very interesting shaped island. You can see there that the island is in the middle, across the narrowest part of the island. And that runway is only 950 meters long, which is why they used such a small airplane. It was a short takeoff and landing airplane. It had to be. It was the only aircraft type that could land there. So that was a bit of fun. More about that later. Where it says Lord Howe Island Museum is where nearly all of the population live in all those trees. And the rest of it is quite rugged terrain. And you can see the reef on the right-hand side there, and the lagoon. That's the lagoon that Francis Chichester landed at, where he crashed his aeroplane and had to spend 2 months rebuilding it. I don't have time to tell you more about that because I need to speed up even more. I'm now going to talk about the 2 beaches the one beach that I wanted to operate from. Google Maps again. The red circle shows the beach I wanted to operate from because that was pointing on the long path, or so I thought. That was my beach of choice. Here's a close-up of it. You can see it's right at the end of the runway. You'll notice here, by the way, that runway is 950 meters long. So the narrowest part of the island is only about 500 to 600 meters wide. And this was the beach I wanted to operate on. However, it looks as though there's a road running past it, but there isn't. That's just a track. You need a 4x4 to get up where it says Blinky Beach. The only place there's a road is just where there's that 90-degree turn in the road at the end of the runway. And I thought rather fancifully I could just walk across those sand dunes, but the same thing came to hit me as hit me before with the elevation of Google Maps. Those sand dunes aren't flat. They are big. You can't see the beach from them, from the runway. I think they were built up as a sort of runoff area in case aircraft got to the point where they couldn't stop in time. There was no way I could get to the beach there. The nearest you could get to the beach was just above where it says Lagoon Road, and you could drive your car up to across that green patch of grass, but you had to stop there. And that's what it looked like when you did that. That's the nearest you could get to the beach. You couldn't see the beach, and even when you could, that's the size of the breakers you were having to contend with. So that beach was out. So I chose, really there was no other choice, to go on the other side of the island to where the red circle is there. And you'll notice there, that was the main road on the island there. That place is called Cobby's Corner, and that was really close to the beach. So I thought, well, it's short path, but what can you do? And here we are. It's the Maldives all over again. Last time on a tropical island. This is the single 20-meter vertical dipole. And it was just magic. And the big thing was, I'm taking this picture leaning against the car. The coax run was very short. Here's the antenna, one single vertical with only 10 meters of coax. And you can see that this is giving us about tad short of 6 dBi. I've not shown you this image before because I only talked about 2-element arrays in the previous talk. But just to remind you, the 2-element version of this, which is what I used on the Chatham Islands and on Norfolk, was producing 10 dBi. So it's almost half the gain of that antenna. It's Hobson's choice. How did I do? Well, on 20 meters, the same thing again. I had both evening and morning sessions. I worked Gs on both sessions, even though neither of these were a long path destination, at least I thought they weren't. And I'm just going to go briefly through the grey line images of these. That's the first one. I only worked 8 QSOs. That was an evening session, so it was morning reception in the UK. And as you can see from the diagram in top right, I was beaming towards the west. And it was mostly, well, it was all Gs apart from one VK. G3IRQ again, he gave me a 5 and 8, so I was pleased about that. I wasn't sure which way round it had gone. Which was it, north, was it south, or was it straight across the daylight area? I don't know. But what Peter and PD2DA said, Ben, Papa Delta 2 Delta Alpha, they both said they could only hear me on the long path. So if that was the long path, then it was coming off the side of my beam, but that's a very broad beam on with a single vertical dipole. That yellow symbol is quite representative of the broadness of the beam. And without, you're still getting nearly 6 dBis to the south. So I was convinced then from what Peter and Ben had said that I was actually going round the long path over Antarctica. So that was pleasing with just a single vertical dipole. I wish now in retrospect I'd asked a lot more stations which way they were beaming. It was only when I got home and I started to analyze this, I started to realize that would have been a very valuable tool. But never mind. And that was the evening. That was the morning session from Lord Halbert, evening reception in UK. And I'm pretty sure that must have been off the other side of the beam, this time over the Arctic. But the thing that puzzled me greatly was all the American stations. I don't know how I worked them. One station in particular interested me, and that's the one just below the Great Lakes there, if you can look at that bit of the States. He was a Whiskey Alpha 4, and he said, I am working you using 1.7 watts. And I thought, my God, that puts me in my place. I thought 100 watts was relatively low power. But when I looked him up on QRZ.com, I noticed that what he'd neglected to tell me was that the size of his antenna. He's using a 5-element monoband 20-meter Yagi on a 93-foot boom. Sorry, no, sorry, wrong. On a 60-foot boom on a tower that was 93 feet tall. No wonder it could work me, even with 1.7 watts. Anyway, so that was my assumption about the path length. I don't know whether I was right or wrong, whatever. And at last, you'll be pleased to know a picture of a 40-meter antenna. I don't think I showed you any 40-meter antenna pictures before. This was just a single quarter wave vertical down at Cobby's Corner. You can see the reef in the distance, so the water was nice and smooth. So I was quite happy to put it right at the water's edge. Here's the diagram for this. This time the feed point was at the base of the antenna, obviously, 10 meters of coax. And this was only giving me 4 dBIs of gain. But, you know, Hobson's choice, but at least it got a very, very wide azimuth beam width, as you can see, and that was equally important. The 2-element version of this, which I talked about in my last talk, has double the gain. So again, Hobson's choice. Once more, I had both evening and morning sessions working from on 40. Once again, Peter was there in one of them. Another guy, per DK7LJ. I'm sure you've worked with him. He's a guy on 40 there quite a lot. And TOOT4A on 40 as well. And Tio gave me a 5 and 9, so I was pleased about that. Here is the evening session, morning the UK, when I only worked 8 stations, only 2 distant ones, the rest of them are VKs and ZLs. But there's an indication of the stations I heard. I heard Dave, GW3XJ, and John, G3XRJ. They couldn't copy me. I could hear both Peter and Per at 5.9, but they both gave me 2 by 2. Now, if Peter gave me a 2 by 2, I'm pretty certain that this path, I reckon, is also over the Antarctic. But that's just my guess. I might be wrong. I don't know. Then this is the next session where I was operating in the morning, local time. So it was evening in the UK. I got 55 QSOs out of this quarter wave vertical. I was quite pleased with that in one session. In fact, this is the best 40 meter session, one session I had in my entire trip. As you can see, quite good results. I don't know which way this was. I just don't know. You know, the path length, grey line wise, are both the same, whichever way you go, north or south. And I thought I have to try the 80-meter antenna. Here it is. I've only got one of them, of course, with the loading coil, the postal tube, the lightweight postal tube. And there, I'm not going to give you another EasyNet diagram. There are the prime element, the prime characteristics for it. And here, by comparison, are the elements, the characteristics I showed you in my last talk. And you can see there is a difference, but not as much as you would think. You know, one vertical dipole is giving me 4 dBs. A 2-element vertical is only giving me an extra 1.5 dBs of gain. You know, I'm left wondering, was it worth all that effort of taking 2 of these? Well, yes, I needed 2 postal tubes to protect the screw jacks when they're in the suitcases. What else would I have done? Anyway, I spent a long time making a serial section transformer for this to make sure it worked this time. Spent nearly a whole day making it. But as soon as I switched on, I realized it was a waste of time because my experience told me with a noise level of 5.8 to 5.9, even in this spot, I could hear nothing other than that. I was wasting my energy. And so I saw my dreams of the Holy Grail of 80 meters slipping through my fingers. So I wondered, in fact, the site where I was operating from, you can't see it there, it's just behind that bit of grass there. I wondered whether those 2 huge great mountains on the south side of Lord Howe were somewhere acting as a sort of big reflector to help me. I wasn't sure, but you can see the runway here, just running across there in the foreground. You see the piano keys on the right-hand side there at the end of the runway. And interestingly enough, as I took off from Lord Howe on the way back, I thought I have to have a photograph, and you can see at the extreme left there, the runway. We'd just taken off and we were just turning towards Sydney. The red circle shows where I operated from. And you can see here that, in fact, maybe those two lumps of rock weren't helping me at all, because when you look at the orientation of that and where I was firing the beam, the center of the beam was pointing that way. And so that meant the short path over the Arctic was tangential to the beach in one direction, and the long path over the Antarctic was skirting along the base of those two mountains. So they weren't helping me at all. So as it happened, it was purely by chance. What I thought was not a good place for either long path or short path turned out to be so, and that might explain why I was getting those results both ways. I don't know. So this was my last view of the Lord Howe. I'd love to go back. Whether I will remains to be seen. So onwards then. And when we flew into Sydney, I was rather pleased to find that for once, normally when I've flown into Sydney, I seem to approach it from the sea over Botany Bay. This time, I don't know whether it's because of a small aeroplane and less noise, I don't know. We flew right over the top of Sydney Harbour, and I'd never done that before, so I had to take a photograph. And this was very nostalgic for me, because almost 12 years before I took this picture, to the day almost, see that circle there showing the two flags on the top of the bridge. I don't know whether you can see there's a little dot just below them. That's someone who's done the harbour bridge climb. And 12 years ago to the day, that would have been me. So it was very nostalgic, and it reminded me of just how scared stiff I was of standing there. It was a terrifying experience. Not as terrifying as one I'm going to tell you very later. Well, hopefully not so later. I'm going to get ready to move on now. Okay, overnight in Sydney, jumped on a plane to Hobart. Here's another spectacular. This is Hobart, taken from the top of Mount Wellington, the highest mountain overlooking Hobart for some good miles. I was told you couldn't drive a camper van to the top of this. It was a very twisty, narrow road. They advised that we take the tourist bus, and I thought, no, if a bus can get up there, I'm sure I can in my camper van, and I did. It's a bit hairy. But on the top there, I found out another famous person, apart from other people who are famous there, a particularly famous person had been up there in 1836, and that was Charles Darwin. He climbed up there, and apparently he said in his book that he wrote subsequently when he got back to fame and fortune that he found the climb quite exhilarating. I bet he did. So there you go. Nice spot to go if you've not been, worth the trip up. And Tasmania then. So I'm not going to talk about much other than just the operation I did there, because time's ticking on. So I was going to just stay originally just at one site. I'd only got a few days on Tasmania. It was going to Tasmania was a sort of add-on to the trip. I hadn't planned to go there originally. And I was going to go conservation camping at Mayfield Bay. And on the right-hand side, the purple ellipse shows where I was going to camp. Another of these honesty box things where you put your money in and you get the change under the windscreen and what have you. However, when I got there, I found that it was chock-a-block with campers. There was no such slots available next to the beach. There were a few near the road, but that would have meant laying coax across the road and all the rest of it. The road inside the campsite. I thought, no. And I'd noticed south of there, just before I got to the campsite, that there was another little lay-by there where the red circle is. And so I thought maybe I should use that. This time, there were no notices saying no freedom camping. So this is where I operated from on Tasmania. And there were trees there. There was a drop down, a sort of scramble down to the beach, but it wasn't a vertical drop. You could scramble down to the beach. And so I thought, this time I'm going to strap my antennas to trees, never mind wandering around sticking screw jacks in the sand. And I put up my 40-meter vertical. This is taken from the land side, obviously. And this was on top of a sort of scramble down to the beach. And I thought, I'm going to try something different. I'm going to try and turn this into a sort of vertical dipole. And on the right-hand picture, there's the vertical taken from down on the beach. And I don't know whether you can see, it's very difficult to see here, but just to the right of that tree, you can see the vertical sticking up there between the two trees. There's the base, just the top there. And then there's a very thin line running down. That is just a wire. It's a quarter wave length piece of wire on 40 meters. So it's 10 meters long, and it runs down through the bush, and it stops just short of the sand there. So depending on what you look at this is a quarter wave vertical with a very, very steeply sloping radial, or it's a very, very bent vertical dipole. Tasman, you take your choice. And whoops, how did I do with that? Well, I'm going to tell you actually. Here you go. This was operated the evening time there, so it's early morning in the UK, and I didn't work very many stations. This time I've just listed them all there, and I've listed also the reports from the log. And you can see there that good old G3IRQ was there. He gave me a 5 and 7. Paul in Alicante gave me a 5, 9 plus 10, which I thought was superb for 40 meters. And quite a few of the other G stations who are from the 80-meter gang as well. Which path is this? I don't know. I was beaming in the direction, as you can see there, which was towards the dark side of the planet. I haven't a clue which of the two. And then once again, you know, if it was off the side of the beam, it could either go over the Arctic or over the South Pole. So I can't believe it would have come, you know, gone all the way over Tasmania and then straight over to Europe. So I don't know. I'm going to have to do a lot more reading up on propagation, it seems to me. And then the 20-meter antenna was the good old vertical dipole. And that was strapped to a tree. I'm standing down on the beach there on the left-hand picture. On the right hand is a close-up. You can just about see, if you really look halfway up that tree, you can see where the feed point is, and then the coax droops down and then up to the camper van, which is just to the right of that picture. And how did this one do? Well, here are the results. And that just speaks for itself. Peter gave me a 5.9 plus 15 dBs. And all I can say is, oh, wow, what a way to end the trip, because this was my last operation. And it was just phenomenal. And I'm not even going to bother telling you, you know, about, you know, propagation and all that sort of stuff. What I'm going to do now, though, is share with you something I've been investigating since I came back. And this links into the question that Ken asked me after the end of my last talk, which was, why don't you put a capacity hat on when, you know, on your antenna when you're out in VKZL? And I said my antenna was too flimsy. But when I got back, I thought, you know, I've not managed to do 80 meters. The one thing I didn't do was 80 meters from there. So I started thinking, I need to be down at the sea. I need something that I can move around, never mind screw jacks. I want to move in and out with the tide. So this is what I decided to do. This is Port Logan Bay, about a mile down the road from my house. This is my tractor, originally bought to put my boat in and out the water. For those of you who are into tractors, this is an International Harvester 785. It's fully 41 years old. No tax, no MOT, just insurance. Wonderful piece of kit. A bit rusty, a bit old, but it still goes. And that loading coil is my attempt to make the biggest loading coil in Scotland. Maybe you GMs who are listening to this may tell me otherwise. It's a big plastic pipe I found when I was beachcombing. It's 2 meters tall, 30 centimeters in diameter. I'm using aluminium tape on it. And in this iteration, I'm using a spider beam, which is not really strong enough to take a top hat, capacity hat. And the other problem with it is I wanted to drive down to the beach with it fully erect like that. And I couldn't, because down the single track road from my house, there's a power line that runs across the road. And it's too tall for this to go under safely. So I had to think again. So this is what I came up with. There's the loading coil. And I decided to try and shorten the top. And I did what I did here. I took a black plastic rainwater downpipe. You can see that lying on the ground, the bottom bit on the left-hand side. And the outer sheath are baked bean cans, end to end, connected together. And that, by the way, there's the capacity hat sitting just above it. And when you assemble that, it looks like that. And there it is on its trailer. The trouble is, I've only taken it down to the beach once. And of course, the problem is, you know, I've got it built up here at home. You get with that something and put it right next to the water, and of course it gets detuned. So I've now got to work out a way of making it easy to take off baked bean cans or put a few more on, or put some tapping points on the loading coil or whatever, to find out whether this will get my holy grail of 80 with a minimal antenna. But of course the problem now is, you know, the likes of Ron aren't there anymore, and there aren't as many European, you know, as many stations as there are when you're working it the other way. So am I going to do that? I don't know. Now, one last couple of things and then I'm finished. You remember in that first talk, I showed you a picture of the Auckland Sky Tower and said I would just mention that briefly. Well, here it is. Now, this is 200 meters tall. It's got a capacity hat already, and it's only a few hundred meters from the sea in Auckland. And of course, it's famous for, among other things, it lets idiots jump off the top of it. Here's an idiot doing just that. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if it had two vertical wires running off it? You could have a two-element vertical array. That would be cool. But it actually does have two wires already. Here's that idiot again in close-up. And the two wires are running either side of him. And you can see in the top left-hand corner there, there's cameras which are on little rollers. And when this character is doing his death-defying stunt, they're busy taking pictures of him. Now, you've probably already guessed who that idiot is. It's got more than a passing resemblance to me because it is me. I just jumped off that walking the plank thing at the top right there. And there is another rope attached to me to my back. And back in the top of the tower, there's a huge, great big hydraulic winch. And the first 3 seconds of this jump are free fall. That's why I'm spread eagled and I've got winglets under my arms. Great experience. And then slowly the winch slows you down so that when you touch down, you're doing less than walking pace. And I just like to just give you, I've composed a little limerick. Now, for those of you who aren't from the UK, I might just have to explain, pardon me if I'm teaching you to suck eggs. A limerick is not only a town in Southern Ireland, it's also what we in the UK describe as a small poem that's got rhymes in it. And I compose a little limerick and it goes like this. There was an old man called Bower who jumped off the Auckland Sky Tower. But what was the fee? Why, he got it for free. Over 75s have that in their power. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are 74 years and younger, you have to pay 240 New Zealand dollars, about 120 quid, to do the jump, which is 36 sessions of either pure joy, if you're sort of half a screw loose, or unadulterated terror. But if you are 75 or over, you can do it for free. I didn't have to pay for this jump at all. I still had to pay for the videos, but not for the jump. So it was well worth the effort. And then, so really, there's just one other thing I'd like to say, and that is I'm going to end now. My next slide is my last one. When I retired from the Air Force, we moved up to Scotland, and I'd spent a couple of postings in the Air Force in Scotland, in Fife and in Edinburgh. Then we moved back down to England again. One of the jobs I got after I'd left the aerospace industry after a few years climbing the greasy pole of promotion was at Prestwick Airport on the board of a company which was rebuilding jet engines for civil airliners. And we came up to Ayrshire, my wife and I, were house hunting in Troon on the coast there. And it was a bit of a stressful experience. And I said, why don't we just go and have a cup of coffee and a cake, and relax a bit. So we went into this cafe, and it was the usual sort of cafe where you went along, you got your tray and your plate, and you picked all the goodies you wanted from what was on display and got your coffee and went up to the pay. And we did all that, and there was this little wee lassie there, the waitress. And I got there, and of course, it's been some years since we lived in Scotland, and I tended to forget the sort of mannerisms. And she looked at me and said, "Is that you?" To which I very nearly replied, "Well, of course it's me. Who else could it be?" And of course, all of a sudden I thought, hang on a minute. No, I know what she means. Because of course in Scotland, "Is that you?" means, "Is that all? Have you finished?" So I'd just like to finish, since I'm a GM, although obviously, despite living in Scotland for over 38 years now, I still got my English accent. I'd just like to say, in my attempt at the Scottish accent, that's me, Jimmy. Thanks for listening. So there we go.
Wonderful story, Bob. Wonderful story. But before you revealed your death-defying stunt at the end there, I was roaring with laughter over your portable antenna with the capacitance hat on it. which had to
Yeah.
be pulled by a tractor. But you actually couldn't pull the thing down by a tractor. And it I mean the whole story, Bob, from beginning to end was very, very entertaining. And I'm just going to chuck this out the room here. I guarantee you are not the only person amongst everyone who has been watching your tale tonight to have forgotten something which was quite important to you when you go out to work in portable. I remember the moment many years ago going out to do a portable activation, antenna sorted, nice camping chair to sit on, all set up, radio, battery fully charged, all superb. And then I went to look for the Morse key and oh, I left the Morse key behind. And then I thought, never mind, I'll do what I normally don't do. I'll operate sideband, get the microphone plugged in. Of course, I didn't have the microphone either. So that was a delightful portable operation. And I spent several hours in that location chatting to passers-by about what I wasn't doing rather than what I was doing. But no, it was a very, very very, very good presentation, Bob. So I'm gonna chuck it out to the room here now and just see who wants to make a point, ask a question, anything you want. Over to you, everybody. Who wants to go first? Everyone's gone quiet now. Ken's just trying to work out how he gets that tractor down to Alicante and drags his antenna along the salt lagoons.
I have been to the Auckland Sky Tower, but the weather was bad when I was there, and they were not doing that on the day.
Yeah, but it was a really good experience. I remember standing there right at the edge, and there's two stanchions, and they say lean out and look down where you're going, and then when I say 3, 2, 1, go, let go of just let go of the stanchions. And I remember looking down there and thinking, well, one of two options here. I'm going to do it okay, or I'm going to end up as raspberry jam on the streets of Auckland. It was a toss up, but it was worth doing, especially for nothing.
Now, I've been to quite a few beaches around, camping in a Maui camper van, very similar to that, and set up different places going around. It's great fun.
Yes, it is. I wish, when I'd realised that there was a split charge relay in those systems, and the house battery was always fully charged, because on Tasmania I didn't go to holiday park at all, and it was fine. I could have gone 5 days or more without worrying about charging it up. And if I'd have known that, I wouldn't have planned everything with military precision. And I only spent one night in each location. I'd have been much more relaxed, and then I could have stayed in the promising locations where I knew it would work and taken things much more relaxed than I did. And I'd love to go back again, but I don't know. It's a long way, and I'm no spring chicken, so I don't know. It's interesting.
In fact, in the modern vans, anything less than about 5 years old, they've got specialised DC-DC chargers in them, because you don't even have to worry about split charge. They'll actually, because of the weird alternators they've got now that they fit on them, which also deal with stop-start vehicles and things like that. I mean, on the motorhome we've got, it'll actually charge the leisure batteries at about 40 amps.
Yeah, and I'm beginning to think, I'm just wondering when the customer service people chatted out this standard line about we advise you go into the holiday parks. I thought, hang on a minute, is there some sort of business relationship between the van renters and the holiday parks? One has to be a little bit suspicious. I don't know.
Yeah.
Thank you, Phil. Anyone else with a question or comment to Bob?
Yeah.
Hi, Phil.
Hi, Bob. Yes, interesting part two. Very good. You just mentioned about 80 meters. Yes, I mean, since we've altered the clocks, there's a bit of activity on 80 in the mornings, but nothing like at the moment. It's early days yet, but obviously there's no run. And As far as I know, we haven't got any other ZLs. I think Nick probably is coming through. Certainly, he's coming through in the evenings on the short path, but it's quite a difficult one, I find. Long path in the mornings is normally easier. But yeah, it's at the moment it's really, apart from Dave and Colin talking, you know, on 80, there's the odd person calling in, but it's a bit slow to start at the moment. So we'll see how it picks up.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to, you know, the trouble is I'm still rushing around doing stuff. You know, the fallout for spending that time in New Zealand and out there, you know, there's so many jobs around the house now that need sorting out. You know, I've been rushing around all summer trying to do them, things I'd just neglected, you know, because the planning of this, building the antennas, testing them, and then going. By the time I got back, I was running on fumes. I really was. And it's taken me a lot, you know, one of the reasons I've not gone back in the air, because I know how once you get back on the air, it just takes over your life again, you know. But I will be back this season, either down on the beach or here from home on 80. And you're right, it's not going to be the same without Ron. It's such a shame. But, you know, we'll have to try and, you know, get a few more people to try and understand the magic and the frustrations of 80-meter DX on the bands. And I've got a question for everyone here now, if I may. As you understand there, I was trying to analyze how the propagation modes had worked from those various locations. And of course, you know, I kept thinking, hang on a minute, you're thinking like an 80-meter DXer here. You know, the only way it's going to propagate is right via either grey line. Whereas on 20 meters, it's not quite the same. And it's a long time since I've operated on 20 here from home. So, you know, you guys might know better than me. Are any of those contacts I had, are they likely to have happened just in full daylight mode, not going around the grey line? I can only assume that they would. I don't know. Oops. Maybe no one knows here either. I don't know.
I think it's hard to answer that question, isn't it, Bob? I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's possible, but equally, you know, you're unable to work out whether you're going, you know, the long way round or the short way round, and you can often tell, of course, by the sound of the received signal. But no, I mean, I think that's part of the wonderful nature of propagation, isn't it? That, you know, things happen that surprise us, really. So bands that appear to be dead are not dead, and where you don't expect propagation to exist, it suddenly does. And there's all kinds of explanations for it, which are quite surprising.
Yeah. I think also one thing I would say, you know, the other lessons learned here are don't overcomplicate things, because in retrospect, when I think of the successes I had on this trip, which are obviously 20 and 40 only, you know, the best, as I think I said, the best 40-meter activation I had on this trip was on Lord Howe, using just a single quarter wave vertical. And I'm now thinking, and when you add in that business with the ATAS mobile whip, I'm thinking, was it worth all the agony of designing and taking two elements and all the hassle of putting them up and taking them down and all that? And I've come to the conclusion it wasn't. I think the moral of the story is you don't need really more than one mast wherever you're going. And you should be able to get by if you really sit and think about the site and where it's located and optimize that rather than worrying about two element arrays. And the other thing is wet sand does work. You know, I think I've proved to myself that wet sand is just about as good as laying radials down. So I think I've laid that myth to rest. And of course, make sure you don't forget to take a proper head torch. And the other thing is, and I'll just tell you this, I tried to have reserve items of everything electronic, but there's one thing I didn't, and I wish I had, and that was this. This is my SARC antenna analyzer. Some of you may have a SARC. It's really nice. It's very small. I bought this some years ago in the States. And you'll think, surely no one's sold a commercial antenna with duct tape and with self-amalgamating tape.
That's a mile on it.
Yeah, what I had to do, this thing was, I don't know what it is about antenna analyzer design. It's certainly the smaller ones. The nano VNA is the same as this. When I bought this had an SMA socket here. Now, you take this out into the field and you have to hang a flexi lead on it with one of these on if you're going to connect the antenna. It doesn't take long for that socket to break.
Yeah.
And in my case, it broke such that I realized I got to take the case to pieces under these tiny Allen screws, and there were some here as well. And then I had to resolder the wire inside to a surface mount device. And it was touch and go. I managed to do it. And then I wrapped all this around and make it nice and solid. And I took this with me. I never thought I would need a spare antenna analyzer. And I'm just trying to think where it was. It happened on North Island. That's right. It must have been at Ross Beach. My next stop was Christchurch to get on the airplane for Lord Howe. And I went to use the analyzer to check the antenna at Ross Beach, and it wasn't working properly. And then I realized that the first time I'd done this, the continuing use, it had broken again. So when I get to Christchurch, I had to go to a B&Q, which just happened to be next to the airport, to get some Allen keys, because I didn't have any with me this size, to dismantle this whole thing and resolder the thing again. And it was touch and go. And I'm thinking, if this doesn't work, I'm snookered, because how will I know whether the antennas are resonant on Lord Howe? Luckily, I managed to repair it. So the moral is I should have taken this and also the Nano VNA that I've got as well, because that's quite light, even though it's got an SMA connector. So make sure you double up on all your electronic devices, because they're the Achilles heel.
Yeah, Bob, I think for anyone in this room who has operated and does enjoy operating portable, I think what you've hit your nail on the head there is simplicity is the king here. And the other king that you've just described, and I saw Ken nodding his head furiously to that, was what they say on that wonderful housing program in the UK, location, location, location. Location, particularly being down by the sea, being on sand which is soaked with water from the sea, right next to the salty sea, that is worth more than anything else you can play with. And simplicity is the answer. And of course, the simpler something is, the easier it is to repair something if you unfortunately snap something or break it off. And at some stage, everyone's done that as well. So I think that little nugget of advice you gave there is really key to it. It really is.
Yep. In the meantime, I'm trying to work out how to get some baked bean cans and a tractor into my whole luggage. And I don't try and smuggle it through Qantas security, because they'll never let me put it in a separate bag like they did, as I told you last time.
It wasn't gonna go onto that short takeoff and landing plane you went on either. Ken, over to you.
Yeah, fantastic that, Bob.
Thank you.
Throughout part one and part two. Just a simple question, really. I looked at your list of stations that you worked, and all of them are what we call the big hitters in Europe. Obviously, DK7LJ Per and EA5 Japan Echo Paul with massive beams.
Yeah.
Did you work anyone with simple antennas, or was it literally just the half a dozen station? What I mean by simple is, did you work anyone in Europe with a vertical antenna or a sloping antenna? And if not, when you're out on these islands, what other stations were you able to copy? Were you being hindered by Japanese? Because I talk to a lot of VKs and ZLs, and they say, oh, the Japanese is just literally 5.9 plus, and we can't hear Europe because of the Japanese. I just sort of wanted to throw that in and ask you.
Okay. Well, to answer your first question, the problem was a lot of the time, and I wished I'd actually, tried to ask those sort of questions, like, among other things, which way's your beam pointing and all that, and I didn't. And the problem was, Ken, that, because I was in relatively rare places, you know what it's like. Someone spots you on the cluster and the result is pandemonium breaks up. And even trying to manage it such that you can get them so that, one country, then the next country, the difficulty is, it's like trying to herd a bunch of cats. And there's a tendency to end up in staccato contest type operation. You feel the need to do it. And I think if I do one of these again, I will just slow down and think, no, I don't want to get into that. I know these people are desperate to work you, and you feel as though you must speed up because these guys are desperate to work you, But certainly some of those stations, I'll quote one, for instance, Chris, G4BGM. I think you remember I showed a picture of him at Biggin Hill on my first talk. He's one of the 80-meter bunch, as Phil knows only too well. But Chris doesn't use fancy antennas on 80, and indeed on 20 and 40 either. He's not got a huge beam or anything like that. And I worked Chris on a number of occasions. So certainly there were people who weren't big hitters. There's no doubt about that. Obviously, you're going to have the guys with the big guns. I mean, Paul in Alicante worked me on just about everything, but then he's got a massive system. You'd expect that. And so has Per DK7LJ. I mean, he's been on 40 many, many years as well. So I'm sure there were people, but I can't answer that question directly for you, I'm afraid. And Peter, G3IRQ, has a good setup. I've been to see his. So, of course, that partly explains why he was giving me such good reports. I don't think for a minute I would have got a 5.9 plus 15 from someone who didn't have a very good setup. That's very much the case. And as regards the Japanese, well, no, I didn't. And the interesting thing was, I was chatting to a guy who'd been to Lord Howe some years ago on a DXpedition, a couple of years ago. And I said, I'm thinking about going out there. Where's the best place to stay and all that. And then as his parting shot, he said, by the way, watch out for the Japanese. See, and I thought, oh my goodness. But I never had that problem. And the only thing I can ascribe that to is because certainly you'll see a lot of the paths I was firing on and getting QSOs up, we were going right over the top of Japan. So you would think that I'd been completely clobbered. But you'll also notice quite a lot of those plots I got, all I was working was G's and Europe. There was nothing in between. And I think part of that is ascribed to the fact that the polar diagrams from my antennas were the maximum gain was at 5 degrees elevation. So the hops were such that they went straight across over the JAs before they had chance to hear it. And that's why there was that sort of dark zone between me and the other side of the world. That's the only explanation I can give you, because I never had, and I know what you mean, because, 50 years ago when I was in the Persian Gulf as an Alpha 4, that's what used to happen then. All you could hear was a wall of Japanese, even then. And so it's a very good question, but no, I didn't have that problem.
And just a quick comment about, I know you were using vertical dipoles, and I know you like making them a bit like I like making antennas, but there is a commercial one that's only about 10 feet long or 10 feet high, and it's called the iPro Traveler, and it fits in a bag, and it's about €300. It is available in the UK, and it's called the letter I and then Pro Traveler.
Got it.
And there used to be one by Force 12, who have obviously finished production of them now, called the Sigma 5, which was exactly the same. But now there is the same guy that ran Sigma 5, that ran Force 12, has now produced a 2-element vertical dipole that you can put at like 3 feet above ground, but it's about $800.
All right. And what does he now? What's his commercial name then? Now, if he's no longer part of Force 12.
I've got the leaflet. I can find it out.
Well,
whilst anyone else is asking you a question, I'll see if I can find it.
Or failing that, Ken, my email address is on my QRZ.com page. Just drop me an email. I have to say, having had the experience with that ATAS 120, I'm a convert to commercial antennas. I probably will never make another homebrew antenna as long as I live. Well, until I finish with the baked bean cans.
Well, I saw it when I saw the ATAS on the side of the car. I thought the car is acting as a good reflector here.
Yes. What I'm going to do, Ken, is I'm going to build an EasyNet model now with as accurate a representation of that camper van as I can. I've done it for my tractor. I spent hours making a wire model in the software of the tractor, because it does have an impact. Even if it's not electrically connected, it's a huge reflector. And I'd like to try that, because I suspect that the radials that I was using on that ATAS were doing the heavy lifting. I think the ATAS was just a sort of little appendage on the end of it. And so I'm going to play around with that. And I have not ruled out taking my screw jack down to the bay, screwing it into sand and putting that ATAS on top of it, just to see what happens.
Possibly, yeah. Right. Okay.
I think, by the way, Bob, I think Jeff might have left us, or he's still logged into the room. But Jeff M0AUG in his QTH is unable to put up any kind of antenna really, and he uses an ATAS 120. And he reported on our WhatsApp group at the weekend, I think on 10 meters, he was just working DX all afternoon during the CQWW SSB contest on the Sunday afternoon from using that ATAS 120. I think Jeff will correct me if he's listening to me now, but it's something like 120 QSOs in the afternoon, mainly into South America and to the Caribbean. He was delighted with that very, very simple antenna.
I think the key is a good ground plane or whatever it is that you've got. But, you know, I'm starting all sorts of crazy ideas. I thought, if I buy another ATAS and connect them base to base, would I be able to then have an ATAS equivalent of a dipole, a tunable dipole? You might need two rigs to control them at the same time, though. I don't know. Crazy. Anyway, that's very useful. Thanks for those questions. Yes, that's excellent, Ken. I'll look into those two and report back.
Well, just as I just went into my cupboard and I found it. It's called the New Evolution Vertical, and it's on the web, and it's by Tom Schiller, SCHILLER.
I've heard of him before. He's written some interesting books on antennas. Yeah,
that's right. He's the guy that used to own Force 12.
Yes, he's written some very interesting antenna books. Yeah, thanks for that. Great.
The New Evolution Vertical, and this is one that might interest a few people.
Oh, right. What's that from?
That's from an old Radcom many years ago, and that's a top hat vertical antenna for 80 meters, 25 feet tall, with 21-foot wires coming down at an angle. I think that's better. You can see it.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
I think that's it, Ken. I think that's in the RSGB antenna notebook.
Right.
The editor of that, Lorna, came and gave us a talk on that. I'm pretty sure that's one of the antennas that's in there.
Well, that's from the CQ magazine of 1990.
Yeah. And while as you were talking about that New Evolution Vertical, George had just posted up a link to because that the other antenna you were talking about, the iPro Traveler, there's two versions of that. There's the home one, which is much larger, and there's the Traveler version. And he just posted up a link to the home version of it. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, what everyone's describing here is some, you know, fabulous antennas that are around. I mean, you know, I know, Bob, you're obviously someone after our own hearts in terms of playing with bits of wire and seeing what you can achieve with that. But you know, there are around undoubtedly some very, very good designs made in a commercial way by radio amateurs that do work extremely well. And I think Ken's just given us a couple of those. Right. Anyone else got a question, comment to Bob while we're all still here?
Bob, don't have to answer this one necessarily, but overall cost of this sort of project. There's obviously a lot of planning goes into it, and
a lot of money. an awful
Yes.
lot of money.
Yeah.
The return flight on Emirates was more than, well, it's £5,500. So I'll let you work out how much this whole thing costs. But you're only here once, and as they say in Scotland, as a significant proportion of this audience know, as they say in Scotland, you're a long time dead, right? And I thought, you can't take it with you. And so, I thought, if I don't do it now, I probably never will. None of us know how long we've got. So it was a lot of money, but I don't regret a single penny of it. Even though I didn't achieve my original aim of 80 meters, I've learned a lot. I thought I knew quite a bit, having been in this hobby for over 50 years, but there's always something new to learn. And that's why we're all here tonight, isn't it? It's the fascination of, it's not the sort of thing that you ever get bored with.
You're absolutely right, though. If you have the means in any way to do this, you've just got to go and do it.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I already think we did we did a 58-day, as maximum you could leave the house for thing, trip around the world, same sort of thing. And, I'm already thinking, what can I do next? Yeah.
Absolutely right. Yes, you did right. So yeah, I'd just say, if you think any chance I'm not sure whether I want to go back as a tourist to New Zealand or that. I mean, I've seen most of all the sites. I mean, I didn't have time to talk about, apart from a little bit about Christchurch, all the places I went, but I still have, I'm thinking, would I want to go back to Lord Howe, and now I know what to know, and have another go at 80 meters? I don't know. I think I'm going to do my best to play with this wacky ideas I'm coming up with here with the tractor and see where that goes first, and then we'll see where we go from there. So yeah, no, it's worth it.
Yeah, by the way, Jeff put into the chat M0AUG that he made 200 contacts using that 8S 110T antenna on the Sunday. So, but again, that's not necessarily location. That's because we're in the fabulous period we are at the moment, at the top of this current solar cycle, and I think, if you're a radio amateur, as we are all in this room here today, take advantage of this solar cycle while we've got it. And, these conditions can last, easily for another year or two. Let's just enjoy it while we can do, because, there is great fun to be had there.
And what you were saying earlier, Bob, about the daylight path, I worked Rotuma on 17 CW this morning, and that was definitely beaming north.
Yeah. The other thing is, and Phil will back me up on this, I'm sure. The 80 meter guys, the guys with the four squares, the likes of Chris G4AMN and Dave GW3XHG. Often when we've been on the band in the morning, we're listening to the ZLs come in, and we all know from experience that in the morning in the UK it's long path, so you expect the signals to come up the Atlantic from Antarctica. And then now and again, you'll hear Chris or Dave say, hang on a minute, it's coming over North America. And you think, what? That's darkness. How can that be? And there's quite a body of evidence that says that grey line signals, this is 80 I'm talking about, I don't know whether it's the same on 20. It'll start off on the grey line, but the grey line path is actually not that good. There's quite a lot of attenuation there. For whatever reason, I don't think we really know why, all of a sudden the signal will shoot off in a bent path over the dark hemisphere of the Earth before it comes back back to the grey line, and then that's why we suddenly find that they're having to change direction. Of course, for us poor fellows who've only got single verticals, it doesn't make a damn blind difference. You don't have to worry about that. You just sit there and yeah. So it's a propagation is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, my advice, particularly to new people into the hobby, of whom we've got a number in our radio club now who are going to be watching this video, later this week. My advice to them is, take advantage of this solar cycle while we're in it, because, you will have enormous fun working that DX with very, very simple antennas, simple vertical antennas and low power, and you can work the same DX as these super stations that can do it all the time.
Especially if in your 70s, because you might not get another one.
Indeed, Phil, that's very true. That is very true. And it's a slightly terrifying thought, isn't it, Phil? Who was I talking to the other day when I was, I think I posted it in the WhatsApp group. I just remember in the 60s, the solar cycle of
Yes.
the mid 60s, and, you know, just amazing contacts, you know, with 100 watts, 150 watts into a simple vertical antenna, you know, into Hawaii and the west coast of the US and so on, with these enormous signals, and you getting, you know, 5 and 9 reports as well, is just, you know, something you will never forget, I think, is the point to be made there.
And by the way, just one point, if you are planning to go to Lord Howe Island, something I didn't mention in the talk, that aeroplane I showed you, the Dash 200 Series 200, is obviously no longer made. And QantasLink are getting rid of them all. They're selling them on, and they're buying the Dash 400 version of it, which is a much longer fuselage, bigger capacity, but it needs a longer runway, a runway that is longer than that at Lord Howe. And the QantasLink contract with the Australian government, because the Australian government subsidises the fares to Lord Howe, runs out in March next year, and they are planning to buy these new aircraft before March next year. So the inference is QantasLink will no longer be operating the flights to Lord Howe from March next year. So the question is, how are they going to do it? Are they going to pass those aging airplanes on to a smaller operator with all that implies, to then have the contract? So, you know, your comment, Ken, that you made at my last talk, when you said you wouldn't catch me, that is you, in one of those small airplanes, you know, might come back to bite you if you want to go to Lord Howe Island anytime after March next year. How the islanders feel about it, I've no idea.
Yes, I was looking when you went from one country to another. I looked at the water, I looked at the sea, and I realised how dark it was. And I thought, that's a trench. That's quite a few thousand feet deep.
Yeah.
Of the waters, we hear all these stories about the great white sharks around Australia and that. Did you see any of these?
Well, I can't remember whether I mentioned it, but on the two piers, the one on the north coast and the south coast of Norfolk Island, the fishermen go out to catch fish, and when they come back, they just tie up at the pier and they erect a sort of tent or a gazebo right on the pier itself and gut the fish they've caught, and they throw the entrails just into the water. And if you go down to look at this operation and just look in the water, it's just a mass of sharks all fighting to eat these entrails. I mean, I think the biggest sharks I saw there were about 3 feet long. But, you know, there are known big sharks around Norfolk Island. You know, it's a known area. So I think the answer to the question is, I'm not sure I'll go swimming.
No.
Certainly not outside the reef. I don't know whether it's safe in the reef or not.
So you can safely forget to pack your swimming trunks is the advice you're giving us, Bob.
Well, I must admit, I didn't go in the sea once in the whole 8 weeks. I just thought, you know, I've not done that out here, but, you know, I've been to enough tropical islands in my time to go swimming and all the rest of it. I'm here to play ham radio, and I've got to get that 80-meter contact. You know, the Asperger's train spotter, you know, anorak side of me was too far in the front of my brain. I'm glad the emotional, more sensible, well, I use that term advisedly, part of my brain managed to keep control of me, really.
Right, before we say a big thank you to Bob for not just tonight, but the 2 parts of the presentation together, have we got anyone who is dying to ask a question or make a point to Bob before we thank him for his contribution? No, if not, Bob, can I, on behalf of everyone here in Pennine Ham and those that have been watching this and posting comments on our YouTube channel, thank you for 2 brilliant presentations. Tonight's was a very, very nice follow-up to the first one you gave, and lots of information there. So can we show appreciation to Bob? Thanks very much, Bob.
Thank you.
And I'm going to say a good night as well to our viewers on YouTube and those that have joined us there. And thank you very much for sticking with us, Terry, G7WRS. If you're still there, hope you enjoyed it, Terry, and see you at the next one. And I'll also hit the record button and just say to all those that are watching Pennine Ham later on, or see the links to it elsewhere and enjoying Bob's talks, just have a look at our YouTube channel. Come and have a look at our website, pennineham.org.uk, and you'll see details of all the meetings we've got coming up. And I'm sure you'll find them as enjoyable as Bob's has been tonight. So thank you everyone for coming to join us.